SVP and Global Business Head, ESRM, AI and Data Analytics at Tech Mahindra. Hi, Rajesh. We have Rohit Dhar, President, Products and Technology at Upgrad.
Hi.
And last but not the least, we have Paul Murray, Senior Director, Product Management at Sophos.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ms. Murray, and welcome to all of you. We'll begin with a short context, and human progress depends on a lot of factors, but sometimes an event of epic proportions changes us permanently. Our behavior, practices, business models, among many, many other things. Today, as we grapple with the unfortunate consequences of the second wave of the coronavirus, there is one unmistakable and undeniable reality, which is the predominance of technology in every aspect of our lives today.
In fact, the COVID pandemic has truly pushed businesses towards digital transformation like nothing else has. It would probably have taken us 10 years or longer to reach where we have today in the last 12 months. However, this is a long journey, and one ally for businesses in this long journey is the cloud, right? As a technology, over the years, cloud has matured greatly. And today it offers a dazzling array of software and services, whether you mention IaaS or PaaS, SaaS, and several others.
A research report based on millions of users between January 2020 and December 2020 says 53% of web traffic today is cloud related. In fact, in 2020, the number of apps in use by the average enterprise increased by 20%. In the US, organizations with 500 to 2,000 employees now use on an average 690 distinct cloud apps per month, 97% of which are shadow IT apps that are freely adopted by business units and users.
And don't forget that those numbers are actually increasing by the day, yes, right? As cloud gets more and more into our lives and into our businesses. But this growth has also been accompanied by an expected negative kind of side effect. Right? Malware delivery, for example, continues to shift into the cloud. And this research report says that 61% of all malware has been delivered via a cloud app. 36% of phishing campaigns target cloud app credentials, and 13% of campaigns use phishing lures hosted in the cloud, as attackers continue to use cloud apps to gain foothold in organizations.
Malicious Office documents increased by 58% in 2020 and now make up about 27% of all the malware downloads, using cloud app delivery to evade legacy email and web defenses. 83% of users in the enterprise use personal apps, increasing the risk of unintentional or unapproved data movement.
Now, in the context of this growing importance of cloud, cybersecurity on the cloud is becoming critical for businesses. There are three key players involved here. The cloud service provider, the security service or product provider, and the end user enterprise. All three need to work in tandem. Today, we are fortunate to have all three represented here on the panel with us, and we are therefore looking forward to a really cracking discussion with lots of insights. But first, before we get into the discussion, a couple of things to do. I would first like to invite Paul Murray of Sophos to deliver his welcome address. Paul.
Thanks, Alkesh. So again, good afternoon. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining this afternoon. I'm joining you from the UK. Looking forward to a great discussion. By way of a brief introduction, I'd like to just talk for a few minutes about what we're seeing in the security landscape as a security vendor, as more organizations are transitioning to the cloud. So in the constant search for ways to improve productivity and efficiency, cloud is obviously a great enabler. And business efficiencies are realized through the migration of data and applications to the cloud. Benefits like lower cost of operation and improved performance, scalability, and of course, benefits like the ability to work from anywhere, which we've all, for better or worse, benefited from or at least experienced over the last 12 months or so due to the pandemic. So it's no surprising that we're seeing an increase in the number of workloads that are migrating to infrastructure as a service. We're seeing an increase in the number of applications that are being consumed via SaaS, and moreover, more data located outside of the enterprise data center in cloud services. But with any significant change for a business presents risk, and cloud transformation is certainly no exception to that. The skills and resources required to maintain security and compliance best practices in the cloud can represent a significant challenge for businesses to overcome before they decide to go all in. And these cloud environments can be busy and noisy places, and thankfully there's no shortage of security tools available to provide value. But they do also have the potential to overwhelm some security teams. So it can create challenges around maintaining visibility of assets and really identifying what organizations should be tracking and fixing first, quite frankly. And let's take a minute to think about what we're up against here as well. These systems, whether they're cloud or on-premise, are under persistent attack by intelligent and adaptive adversaries. The daily headlines that we see that report new security breaches serve an important purpose. They serve as cautionary tales to remind us that we need to take this preventative action and stay vigilant. But it's also worth keeping in mind that these stories are typically the exception to the rules, that there's no headlines for the businesses that actually successfully defend themselves against thousands of breach attempts every day. And this is largely due to significant improvements in cybersecurity in recent times. We're also seeing that adversaries are shifting their approach from purely automated malware to a more comprehensive approach that combines automation with hands-on operation. So whilst those initial entry attempts are still typically automated, perhaps it's using phishing or exploits, for instance, once that foothold is gained in the technology, many attacks then actually become human operated, and the goal for the adversary is to stay quiet and stealthy. And the best way for them to do that is often to actually act like an employee, to use local tools, use local devices, adopt typical traffic patterns, essentially live off the land, which is why we're seeing a shift from what we would typically have called IT security management to security operations. So I believe gone are the days of a set it and forget it security policy. So as the adversaries are moving to a more hands-on keyboard approach, then IT security needs to do the same, to hunt and detect suspicious behavior and events before they actually manifest themselves into a breach. We need to look for those leading indicators rather than just looking at incident detection, which may of course be too late. And even the most stealthy of attacker will leave breadcrumbs, and organizations need to be able to find and follow that trail to stop any potential attack early in its process. So as you move to the cloud, you need to consider these new threats and new vulnerabilities and think about how you're going to combine both proactive and reactive approaches using cybersecurity tools and security operations working together as a system. So organizations are now working out how to protect their data that is no longer within their physical boundaries. And we're now in a world where a simple misconfiguration of a resource or a service using a cloud provider's management plane could inadvertently create a security hole that exposes sensitive data. So that's a quick introduction from me. Again, welcome, really looking forward to the discussion today. And Alikesh, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Murray, for that introduction. Very interesting things, as you pointed out, that the adversary is always a step ahead somehow. And also very interesting to know that, yes, the headlines are about the breaches. Do we really read about the successful stopping of those breaches? Not really. So I'll go across to Mr. Ashish Sharma of Deloitte for some more context before we begin this discussion today. And as Mr. Murray pointed out, that there are tools available, but at times it could be overwhelming to an organization as to which tool to use and which trail to follow.
Thanks, Suchetna, and hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll take from where Paul mentioned in terms of how the whole environment is getting more complex. And Suchetna, when you said how come a perpetrator is always a step ahead? Actually, a lot of times we really don't need them to be step ahead. A lot of times we possibly as an organization, as teams, if we are able to do some of our basic things right, chances of or an opportunity for a perpetrator is obviously minimized. I think there is enough context setting in terms of what we are talking today. To my mind, I think there are a couple of 2-3 things that I would possibly add to that. And maybe more from the context of India as a country, as a nation, the number of breaches that have happened in the time from where the pandemic started. And of course, we are talking about a lot of these things from a pandemic perspective, and in the backdrop and the context of that. So It said it takes about 300 days to orchestrate a particular breach inside an organization. And you suddenly saw there was a spurt of these breaches from the time March, April, May, June, and go forward in the country with some of the very household names that we all come across, organizations which are very well known. Now, what really led to that? The answer in a lot of ways is essentially what did organizations do, or how did the organizations react to the pandemic? There was obviously a perspective of not letting the ball drop. Service levels could not have gone down. Automatically, what that meant was organizations had the emerging need of moving a lot of their workloads, a lot of their applications, databases on cloud. But it's absolutely common understanding with all of us from a security background, all of us who understand this perspective, that the whole point of view that anyone would say is don't just lift and shift, but try shifting left. There is that whole perspective which has really created a lot of these indoors, these open doors or back doors into the whole thing that we have reacted to when we moved a lot of these workloads to cloud, instead of having the opportunity of looking at what is that I want to move to cloud, what are the basic parameters that I need to take care of. We call that in common terms app modernization. That is essentially making sure that you've assessed it from a security perspective, from a functionality perspective, and then you move the workload out. Now, what you ended up doing in some cases for sure is that you really move that without real good view of what you were moving, what would be the impact from a security perspective. And as someone very, very, very rightfully said was, if there are any issues and if there are any security issues that you may have on an on-prem model, when you lift and shift, you only amplify it in cloud, right? So to my mind, I think a lot of these steps taken have been responsible also in reducing the time frame within which a breach could have been orchestrated. Having said that, let me move more specifically from the perspective of where do we stand. I think a number of panelists have already touched upon the fact that that doesn't mean there is a higher risk of moving in cloud. Organizations need to understand there are a lot of native security capabilities available in any of the platforms. There is a lot of tools and instrument available for any organization to move to cloud, but move to cloud in a very secure way. I often sort of touch upon the fact, even I mean, as in my advisor role, I also look at what is the regulator saying. And to my mind, the regulators definitely see a higher optimism for organizations to move in cloud, but they also do provide a level of caution in terms of what organizations need to do, irrespective of which industry. There is a perspective of guidance on what are some of the important things that an organization need to look at when they move into cloud, when they adopt cloud as their strategy. Security, compliance are going to be the most important things there. I'm happy to have this conversation, perhaps learn a little more from other panelists also, but Alokesh, at this point in time, giving it back to you.
Thank you, Ashish. That was very useful. And I think one of the key things that I'll take away from that is, like you said, don't lift and shift, right? Shift and lift. So, be very careful of what you're trying to do, right? So what you're essentially saying is be in the cloud and then decide what all you can shift into the cloud and how, and make sure that you keep the cyber, security issues in mind when you are shifting, right? So that they don't get amplified. Right. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ashish, for that note. Thank you, Paul. Let's now move into the discussion, and we'll take the first question to the panel. And essentially, we'll start with the end user companies. Like I said, we have a combination of end user companies, a cloud service provider in Orlando here from AWS, and we have Paul from the security side. Right. So let's go to the end user companies first. I'll start with Venkat and then Rajesh and Rohit. Basically, see, there have been multiple instances of breaches in the cloud. over the past 1 year. I'm not saying in your organization as such, but if we look at the list of the top 10 or 11, let's say, breaches in the last 1 year, it's quite scary. And uh, most of the time we notice that certain basic things have not been done, right? So for example, data is there on a server that is not encrypted or not secured. Data is not stored in a encrypted form, or multi-factor authentication has not been used properly. So very fundamental things that are not. So are these the things that are going wrong? Where are we making these mistakes? Why is security becoming such an issue? Especially when Ashish is saying, if most organizations do things right, and when you do things right, there is really no chance for the perpetrator to get in unless they really are expert at hacking into your systems. So Venkat, you want to start? You're on mute. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Good afternoon, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be a part of this discussion. Essentially, I will take you through the case of our own institution, which converted from NBFC into a bank. And obviously, the local regulations came into play then. Then we were hosted on a cloud outside the country. And obviously, the regulations wanted us to bring it back to the country. So that was a big challenge in the transition phase. As you rightly mentioned, Alkesh, the point was that there were numerous distinct entities which were there in this particular journey, which we had to cover 100%, because even all of us know that even if we live out one in this cloud environment, it's going to be a challenge. Obviously, the journey was taking nearly 6 months to a year for us to move from the cloud outside the country to the within the country. And thereon, from there, we came into the regulations of the RBI, which is very helping institution in the sense that they guide us to the last mile, something like 150 to 200 points every quarter. We have to go and submit it to our regulator to ensure that we are in line with what is expected of them. So that helped us in the journey of transition from crowd in a cloud outside the country to the inside the country, and thereon on what are the specs which we have to adhere. That is point number one. Second, obviously, in the terms of the pandemic, as we have been discussing earlier, we have to actually run and shift the whole thing. So at this point of time, we didn't have an option because nobody expected a pandemic of this nature possibly in March 2020. So at that point of time, we actually ran, and parallelly we were ensuring that all the security features are taken care of. Unlike other industries, the peculiarity or the importance of the banking or the financial service industry is there is no conversion of a material to money and money to outside world. In our case, it's clearly a liability segment, and especially banks, because they have the liabilities, unlike NBFC, which more focuses on the asset part of it. In our case, it's very clear that we have liabilities, and within seconds, minutes, the money flows out. Everybody knows about the Bangladesh case, and everybody knows about the cooperative bank case in Pune. So there have been a lot of challenges in we running and moving the whole thing in the March 2020. In the journey, we learned a lot. Luckily, as well as for us, as well as the industry, we didn't see that there has been any major impact or hit during this period. Though I would say that there are nearly 4,000 attacks across the globe on the cloud on any given day. So that is a kind of a background. I would say that we have prepared well, number one, and we have also been lucky to the extent that whenever we found that there have been gaps, we had covered it well much before anything untoward happened. Back to you.
I'll go to Rajesh now with the same question. As Venkat mentioned that, we really had to touch ground running when the pandemic hit us, because as you were adopting, as you were going digital, a lot of data had to be shifted to cloud. So, and with that increase the number of breaches. So are we going wrong somewhere? Are we, unnecessarily complicating something which is simple, which is cloud security? Or is it just too complex, securing the cloud?
So Chetna, from my perspective as a global system integrators, okay, we had to solve the problem in two dimensions. Okay, the first dimension was securing our own self. Okay, because we are running a bank, we are running a telco, we are running an insurance company out of our facilities in India, and somewhere the threat actors know that we are vulnerable. Okay, because the remote working started pretty much in 7 days of everything getting locked down by Mr. Modi. The biggest impact came globally because we had to make people work from home, whether it was a BPO operation or an IT operation, and that made a huge impact to, if I don't get my people working remotely, a bank may shut down because their IT and their operations are run by me somewhere in India. So that was a major lift and shift we did during COVID. And while we were doing that and securing, unfortunately, we did it pretty fast because we were technologically ready. And being a technology company, and our CISO was pretty much ready in terms of the cloud adaptation, in terms of Office 365, in terms of the latest tools which we could use in order to protect our remote workers. Imagine we moved from 5% or 10% remote working to 97% remote working. Okay, that's the kind of impact as a company we saw. And then the second lens, which I look at it from running a security business globally, was how are my customers handling their security challenges? Because every customer was in a different maturity cycle when it comes to the cloud maturity. Okay, and we know that it was more of a hype until 3 years back, and it's more a reality today. But how much of it is a reality? And I know we have on the panel, AWS with Orlando there, and Andy Jassy was talking in his AWS Invent that only 4% of people have actually cloudified. So there is a scope for 96% people to actually take their workloads onto cloud, which is happening very, very rapidly. And as I serve my 1100 customers, I see there is a huge push, moving workloads to cloud. Yes, security is a big challenge or big concern, but they are ready to take that risk. And the amount of effort the cloud providers like AWS and Azure have put in terms of securing those workload being shifting is really impressive. And we are working with the cloud providers to make sure that all my 1100 customers, when they move their workloads or they are already moving their workloads in a rapid way, we are standing with the right kind of tools, with the right kind of technologies, and the right kind of secured approach. But I believe very strongly, and cybersecurity today is ranked just one below the necrotics crime globally, and it's expected to actually take 15 to 20% of the economic value of the internet away. We are handling something which gets attacked in 39 seconds. And as Ashish said, it takes about 300 days to fix it. So you can imagine the problem statement we are dealing with. Something happens in 39 seconds, and if you don't prevent it, you need 300 or 280 days to fix it. It's an amazing stress on the system, whether it is on the people or on the technology, to really find those actors who are coming in during this deep perimeterized security landscape, I would say. So from my perspective, I look at two lenses. How do I secure myself so I can secure my customers? And then how do I secure my global customers? Because they are constantly being attacked on their infrastructure. That's from me, Sucheta.
Right, and in fact, Rajesh, in terms of having a global play, the one other thing that I had in mind was, do you really need a centralized kind of center of excellence to be able to drive global cybersecurity policies, or do if you have so many clients globally, you have your own operations in so many countries globally, right? So do they all have different cybersecurity policies, or you have a centralized center of excellence that actually drives the entire, sort of movement?
Yeah. So Alokesh, every company has their own policies because their businesses are different, their workforces are different.
Right.
And it's very difficult to standardize it. Although cloud will kind of standardize a lot of the policies because they know what is secure and what is not secure when the parameters changes. I mean, currently everyone is data and people were or before COVID, were in their very secure parameters, okay, in their data centers, in their setups. Now that's changed. And moving to cloud is the biggest blessing for any corporate. And I was just telling my CEO, Mr. Gurnani, the other day, what if this pandemic had hit us 5 years back? The readiness of not only the enterprises, but also the cloud providers wasn't apt. I mean, today they are able to take any amount of workloads because there's capacity. Today they are comfortable taking any kind of workloads, secure, under HIPAA compliance, under banking regulatory compliance, because they are actually matured their infrastructure and their policies to a very, very high degree and grade. And even government, I mean, you look at Modi government, they have announced a cloud 2.0 policy because they are
Yeah.
seeing the benefits of not only the cost, but the scale and also the security part of it. So absolutely, I think if this pandemic had hit us 5 years back, we would have been a bigger problem economically because a lot of things would have shut down, including my business of running an ITES industry.
Oh, we would definitely not have liked to see that. Rajesh, we are very proud of what Tech Mahindra has done. We are also very proud of Upgrad and the work that they are doing. Rohit, there's also the fact that, education in India has moved to the cloud faster possibly than many of the other industries that have done. And they've also been facing, more threat attacks, or at least threat perception that is higher in education is what I've read in some reports.
Yeah.
So perhaps you can give us an understanding of your industry and cybersecurity, measures being taken. And the same question, are we doing the simple things wrong? Are we getting it right? Is it getting too complex, the cloud environment?
So I think, first of all, thank you guys for bringing me on board. I really appreciate, all the insights that has come in from Paul, Ashish, Rajesh, Venkat, everyone. The answer to the question, are we making it too complicated or are we getting things wrong? I think the answer is yes. We are making it too complicated. It is not that complicated. If we follow protocols that has been clearly called out from a security standpoint, which is infrastructure security, application security, database security, they are very fundamentals and they are very basics. And if you just follow them through end to end, there's no reason for us to go wrong. There are tons and tons of tools out there which helps us tell us how DDoS attacks can be managed, how you can use pen test to validate your things. How can you test your applications in terms of Sonar, Cube? So these are different kind of, I would say, services, application systems in place that you can just leverage to actually validate where you stand and where you could get to. The VAPT test is a very standard test out there, which can tell you exactly how bad you are in terms of security, and they'll tell you exactly what needs to be done. So there's no reason for us to say that, hey, it's very complicated. It is not. I think probably it's the awareness and acknowledgement of saying that you know what, yes, we are not aware. Let's seek for that information and actually go ahead and fix it. I think that's one of the most important, but I believe is important. Now, if I go back to the education as a sector, I break the sector into three broad segments. This bucket one is a set of organizations.
It's 4 o'clock.
Who do not think technology is the way to go and do not want to move at all. Bucket two, they know that education is technology is a sector. Technology is a tool for enhancing education, but and I would want to learn, but they're still getting there. And bucket three, the edtech sector, which is like technology is the only way to move ahead going forward. I think these are the three buckets that I consider, education. I break education down. I think we are definitely in the third bucket, but there and folks who have been in the second bucket, they're slowly moving into the third bucket. And the folks who have been in the first bucket, they have been pushed to the second bucket, saying, you know what, there is no alternative, else I have to shut shop. The only way is I have to enable it. I have to enable technology. I have to go into cloud. I have to figure out things. So that's how I think the shift is happening. So lift and shift, or whatever you want to call it, Ashish, there is a shift happening across in the edtech sector for sure, or education sector for sure.
And as the shift happens, I think the adoption of cloud also increases.
Absolutely. Adoption of cloud has just gone through the roof. And I think more than anyone, Paul and Orlando will know it more than anyone else here, that the amount of adoption has just gone through the roof. And I think we are privileged, as Rajesh called out, that if this was happened 5 years back, not only Rajesh, I don't think anyone on the screen would have been sitting here. We would be just doing something completely different. I think it's more about, right time, things came in, we were well prepared. And security is something, it's like insurance, right? You actually reduce the risk of getting screwed. And it's reducing, and by thinking through that, the probability of happening that would be low or high, but let's make sure that I chain my gate, I put a lock on my door when I'm going off to sleep. It's that. Now you can have expensive laptops, expensive computers in your home, and your door is wide open, night, morning, evening, every time, and then you're just hoarding more laptops doesn't help. So I think security is something where you put a simple lock, and if you say buying a lock out of the market and putting it on the door is difficult, then I don't know what to do. So that's what I think. So I don't think security is difficult. It is just following protocols and making sure it's been followed to the T. But I completely agree with Ashish. For a 39-second attack, there is a 300 days work that has to be done to fix it. And no one wants to go down that path, including us. So I would rather spend a preemptive measure of fixing it and ensuring that we follow protocols and get it done versus fixing it post facto.
While Rohit has been speaking for the last 40 seconds, trying to impress upon us how simple it is to secure the cloud. Orlando, I'll come to you because there are already questions pouring in, questions about how to, and those questions are for you. So the first question that came to us is actually how to inculcate the use of cloud services without the fear of a breach of security.
Well, that's a broad question, really.
Very broad.
The topic of this discussion in a question.
Yeah, so the cloud is secure by default, and one of the things that I see when I talk to customers and AWS sees is that customers of all sizes, from national government organizations through to large enterprises, all the way down to 2 or 3 people startups, are adopting the cloud because they see the increased levels of security that they can get from the cloud. We often talk about the democratization of security. So regardless of the size of organization you are, whether you are a Department of Defense or an enterprise or a 2-person startup, you can use the same tools, certainly in AWS, that regardless of size. So the security is democratized across all of those organizations. And you have a much greater level of security than you would do anywhere else, plus access to tools that you wouldn't otherwise be able to gain access to. So the cloud brings significant security enhancements for all types of organization.
Right, thank you very much. That was short and crisp, Orlando. And we come to Paul with the same question. Paul, you are the final goalpost creator, right? Sort of the final, the goalie, the goalkeeper, not the goalpost. But so tell us, in your view and in your experience, of working with organizations towards security purposes, you'll also be working with AWS and the other providers, right, for their security needs. What is the reason? What are the reasons that we are getting into these breaches and into these threat perceptions? Is it only that the cyber criminals are smarter and a step ahead of us all the time, or is it also because of certain fundamental errors?
Yeah, great question. I mean, Orlando was absolutely right that the cloud security providers have no shortage of tooling that's provided to customers that would enable them to employ security in their environments. And again, just to reiterate something Orlando said, by default, many of those services are secure by default. But it is unfortunately surprisingly easy to get in a bit of a pickle there and to actually misconfigure things if you're not actually really careful. So I think there's and you'll hear me repeat this over the course of this discussion, I think misconfiguration it continues to be a big problem, even though there are tools and services, no shortage of tools and services, one of which Sophos provides, and we have many customers using our tool, which kind of overlay over the cloud provider's own tooling as well. So we take an embrace and extend approach to kind of leveraging cloud provider security tooling, but also layering on top of that and providing a normalized view for multi-cloud, for example. In terms of why there are still some issues, we certainly see and continue to be somewhat surprised actually at the level of understanding around this shared responsibility model is still not really where we would expect it to be. It's easy for us to say that because we live and breathe cloud security day in, day out, but many organizations, when they make that transition, first of all, to the cloud, perhaps take cloud is secure by default a little too literally, and don't necessarily understand where their responsibility kicks in. And so whilst the cloud security provider is responsible for security of the cloud and the underlying infrastructure and segregation of customer data, etc., a lot of organizations that we speak to actually are still haven't quite twigged actually that beyond that is still on them. And so all the configuration of the services, protecting the data once it's in the cloud. Again, we can provide the tools, and third-party security vendors like Sophos can provide tools, but so can the cloud security providers. So there's no shortage of tooling there, but they need to understand, customers need to understand that the responsibility lies on them. And we hear way too often that believe the cloud security provider is just going to take care of everything soup to nuts. So I think that is something that, that you keep hearing me say it, because it's something we speak to customers about all the time.
Is it like as simple as, you know, keeping the, sorry Suchetna, but just one point that I wanted to ask Paul. You know, if you, is it as simple as, you know, at least you encrypt your data before sending it onto the cloud server, or you don't just send raw data to be sent to the cloud server? Is it something as basic as that people also get wrong?
There's an element to that we could have a very long dedicated debate about encryption probably. So perhaps we don't want to do that, because everyone has their own opinion on encryption. It is much more than that.
You mask your data before it's so.
Yeah, it's not just the data in the cloud as well. So it's yes, whilst there might be a it's more than that. It's IAM. It's secure. It's network security. It's actually all of those elements of it. It's not just did you secure your data, or did you encrypt your data as you moved into the cloud. It's really, how do you prevent that access into your environment in the first place? And we can talk right back to account takeover attacks via phishing that enable someone to actually compromise an IAM user credentials. How do they get access to a service? So it isn't just about the data, it's actually getting access to the application as well. Yeah. So yeah, it's much more than just did you encrypt your data, Rakesh?
Lokesh, if I can.
Sure.
2 words. I completely agree with Paul on the element of shared responsibility. You cannot just expect by default cloud is secure without not doing your part of the work, which is your part is the application security, data security, all of that. And it all depends in terms of what is your use case. Based on that, you secure your systems.
Yeah, I'll go to Ashish.
Yeah, essentially, Paul, the challenges, I think we do have 3 kind of consumers at this point of time, if not more. There could be more. Absolutely, first-time movers into the cloud, and possibly people like us who know a bit of it and then getting into it. And there are emancipated organizations who are using it. But by and large, I would say that majority falls in the second bucket, where we know certain degrees and we don't know certain degrees of this security. And essentially, we do have experts in our own team. But the challenge is always to know the boundary. Because at the end of the day, the boundary is something which, as a consumer, I am not able, because I assume that it is going to be from the CSP end, whereas the vice versa could be true. I'm not saying it's a gap at the end of the CSP. It's more to do with the clear-cut demarcation and communication. I would say that it's more of a softer element than anything else. And essentially, that is a challenge at this point of time. Yeah, I don't disown the responsibility at the consumer end, but I would suggest that, or I think that it is more to do with the knowledge at the end of the consumer that I am responsible for it. If that knowledge is missing, I have to equip myself, I have to do it. That's a different issue altogether. But I think both the parties have to actually join hands here. Back to you.
Right, Venkat, I'll take the question to Ashish. We were speaking about shared responsibility, and that brings us to the law of the land. Do you think India has adequate rules and regulations when it comes to cyber security?
For cyber security, of course. I mean, there are enough guidelines, Suchetna. I think what we are talking here from the perspective of cloud security and regulations around that, I'll give you a view more specifically around maybe financial services, because that's an industry that I spend a little more time. There is definitely more guideline. There's more guideline, as what Rajesh said 5 years back. So I always feel technology, regulation, and use cases. The use cases come first. Or probably technology come first, use cases follow, and then regulations more often than not follows. 5 years ago, a lot of these things were still at their nascent stage. But regulation has definitely kept up. I mean, the first paper that came out of RBI around cloud security was in early 2013-14. 17, it was another round of FAQs were identified. I think from the perspective of regulation, there's definitely been more guidance in the industry, and that's not just for banking, for insurance, for SEBI as well. I mean, all the regulators are definitely are focused on how organizations use this in the right way while keeping in context the risks attached to it. I think one thing which you'll find in any of our conversations, and there are a few things which were being discussed by the panelists, and I just want to highlight properly or re-emphasize, is that shared services, shared responsibility model, right? You can't not appreciate that while you are building up your security, right? Shared responsibility model, depending upon what you are a consumer of. You're a consumer of a software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, business process as a service. It all depends upon where your boundaries lie and where does your provider comes into picture. And a number of things are attached to it also, Suchetna. From the point of view of there is a guideline also from a regulator to say, yes, you have a shared responsibility model, but now don't use the existing organization security policy to try and govern the entire new way of working, which is on cloud, which is more digital. You need to have something which is your risk framework specifically for cloud, which covers all the gamuts of things which you will come across. Shared services model is one thing. The regulatory compliances are a couple of other things as well. Aspects of data residency, localization, Venkat talked about a bit of those things. I do security for my living. And one thing is for sure, that's the way that it is moving. Cloud, a lot of time people say is a one-way street. I'm not going to talk that about because that's obviously can bring in a different, many flavors to the conversation. But yes, it's there for the next 5 to 6 years for all of us to work with before we settle down. And that is why regulatory definitely supports, right? What it is important for you is to really be able to pick what are the models available, pick the tools, do the right thing. I'm not going to go back and start shift and lift again because it's been overused in this session. But all these things will make you more secure. And I do agree with what Orlando said. It is definitely more secure because there is much more money, much more investment that's gone in to build cloud as a secure environment. But it can't be only done by a service provider. It's got to be a shared.
No, you're absolutely right. Can't be only done by the service provider. Has to be, three parties doing that in conjunction. It's a very good point. But before we move further, let us see what the audience feels about this whole issue, right? So we have a question for the audience. And can we run the first poll, please? Okay, so the question is, what are the biggest weak links in security on the cloud? And this is a multiple choice question, so people can pick more than one answer.
The panelists can't participate.
Panelists cannot participate, you can only watch. The options are unsecured joints, interfaces, APIs, consoles that are not properly secured, misconfiguration of cloud security settings, availability of sensitive enterprise data in personal apps of employees, and lack of basic hygiene, unsecured servers, MFA not implemented, lack of independent security audit, etc. All of them are getting almost equal votes. It means all of these are issues. Okay, interesting. Just wait a few more seconds to see. I'm a little surprised by number 3 not getting that many votes. I thought that, given that almost 83% of, there are 83% of the personal instances of enterprise apps that are being used all the time. So number 1 here is, again, it's misconfiguration of cloud security settings followed very, very closely by unsecured APIs and interfaces. And the fourth point is almost very similar. Orlando, what's your view on this feedback from the audience? You agree?
I think that, I mean, there's obviously quite a range of questions there, but I think as certainly as Ashish has said, that you've got to take responsibility for what you're doing in the cloud, and as Paul said, the shared responsibility model is a big part of that. And any new technology that is adopted isn't something that you would just bring into your organization without making sure it fits inside your existing security and compliance and governance guidelines. So being able to ensure that you understand that shared responsibility model and being able to understand where your responsibility takes over for the data that you put in the cloud, how you configure the cloud, and the types of services you use in the cloud is really, really important. So I think there's obviously where cloud is new to organizations, that's a big part of what we do to help them over that hump and help them understand how to map their existing security controls to cloud controls.
We'll go to Paul with the same question. You want to weigh in on what you saw the audience react to, the weakest link on the on cloud as far as security is concerned?
Yeah, I wasn't surprised by that. In fact, the only thing I was slightly surprised about, I thought that the misconfigurations item actually was a bit higher than it was, but they were quite even split between all of those. I would also just pull out the fourth item, which I don't have it in front of me now, but it's around basic hygiene.
That is basic hygiene. Yeah, that's just, despite the amplification, that seems to be a concern still.
Well, absolutely. I think some organizations potentially, when they're lifting and shifting, when they're migrating their workloads into the cloud, need to consider that the basics still need to be covered, right? So operating systems still need to be patched. Access needs to be controlled. I think there is an issue there. It's foundational, but I still think there is an issue there where there's a perception that they don't necessarily have to do all of that. Now, actually, as you move up the stack in terms of moving from infrastructure as a service to platform as a service, there's definitely an appeal there, whereby the underlying infrastructure is abstracted from the customer. It's one less thing for them to be concerned about. So potentially less of that hygiene on a VM perspective, if you like, an operating system perspective. But I still think in that early stage of moving over, there's still a concern. I think that hygiene is not perhaps where it needs to be, and that's echoed in the result by the looks of things.
Rajesh, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, Alokesh, when the enterprises choose to move to cloud, okay, and especially the legacy, the applications were never built for delivering on cloud native. I mean, the likes of Uber and stuff, they created application ground up. But when I work with a telco like an AT&T or a British Telecom or a Vodafone, okay, they have had legacy technologies which were never cloud ready. And when you actually, what Ashish mentioned is when you lift and shift, you have to think about shifting left, which means that are you making those applications secure from cloud perspective? And again, I think there are a lot of tools which are coming up today, which allows you that security. I mean, I remember one of the CIOs of one of the Finnish companies had a conversation with me about 5 years back. And I was out there to take his outsourcing. And he said, but I'm already on cloud. And I said, but aren't you afraid of being on cloud? And he was a smallish, mid-sized company, about $1 billion company with 5,000 employees. And in 5 years back, he said, I can afford to hire 20 security, max 30 security consultants. But I have moved my workload to AWS and they recruit more than 2,000 security. So where am I more secure? And that was kind of opening up absolutely the eyes 5 years back on how the advanced CIOs are thinking And probably he started modernizing his application landscape and making them cloud ready ahead of many of the legacy other enterprises. And I think it all comes down to how ready you are to adopt cloud, your application, your infrastructure. And I think Paul and Orlando both alluded that it is not about just moving data. It is because data resides in application. What if there is a door open in application? Mr. Dar talked about, you can keep on putting locks from the market, but the vulnerabilities are right from infrastructure layer to the application, to the databases, to the actual data. And you got to protect because data is moving across enterprises, across your ecosystem, and it can be attacked when the data is at rest, which is in your data centers. It can be attacked when data is in movement. Okay, when my customer care associate accesses the Citibank data, that's the time when it is vulnerable because it's in movement. And also when it's being used on my phone. So let's say I'm accessing data from my phone, it is vulnerable because if my application on the phone is not secured, it is vulnerable. So I think, tools which companies like Sophos are bringing in and tools which companies like AWS are building up, and we are deploying it for our customers, are protecting the complete movement of data, the application, the infrastructure, and it is maturing every day. So I remember one conversation I had in the M&M headquarters with a very famous personality from Geo, Mr. Suresh Rangachar. And the first question which came to him, this was about 2 years back, was, you're building up a cloud. How secure is your cloud? And he came out very, very simplistically saying, you are as secured till the last time you have been broken in. And you can have 5 locks and 7 locks and 3 security guards to protect yourself. But someday the security is going to get broken up. And how fast you're adapting technologies. And companies like AWS and Microsoft are investing billions of dollars to make sure that we are guarding the interest of the enterprises. So I know I'm stealing up what Orlando should be saying, but when I work through my 1,100 customers, Alokesh, I see this request coming in, the fear coming in, and the more and more we collaborate, it is not about just giving the problem to a cloud guy and saying, "Oh, solve it." It is about putting the right policies. It is about choosing the right kind of lift and shift, and then shifting left as much as possible to modernize and getting the solution done end to end. Because one door open and all the doors which are locked has no meaning, because you can keep the window open and the thieves can come at. And bear in mind, these guys are making, there was the statistics which you mentioned about $20 billion is the cost to an enterprise. Is someone making money out of these breaches, right? I mean, I'm not talking about technology, but these are these actors who know that they can ask for ransom, who knows they can bring the factory down, who knows they can bring a plane down if they are able to securely breach the technologies.
Thank you, Rajesh, for bringing up the topic of collaboration, something we were discussing before we went to the poll, and something I'd like all of you to go back to. The question is, how can shared responsibility model be practically made to work? Typically, it is understood that it is the CSP who's responsible for the security of the servers, and end user enterprises are responsible for the security of their data. But when there's a breach, both parties are equally hit. So how can user companies and cloud service providers collaborate to ensure greater security? Who wants?
Okay, so let's go to Orlando first, and let's make this a little prescriptive, just to ensure that we get the right insights. So Orlando, maybe you can tell us a few things, that you expect end user enterprises to do and they're not doing.
Yeah, so I just to clarify a point there, I wouldn't say that when there's a breach, both parties are equally hit. The shared responsibility model is there to define who does what. Certainly, we're very proactive when we see customers who have a problem or they come to us with a problem, and we have professional services teams who go in and who will deal with the situation there and then for the customer. Very often we see things happening before the customer does, and we notify them. We need to know exactly where to go to do that. So today's tip, if you're an AWS customer, please make sure your account details are up to date, and we can contact you in the event something happens. And the other point is that it's as Rajesh said, it's very easy to be able to protect a cloud environment now. As an example, many years ago, I was a security consultant and I used to install intrusion prevention systems, and that would take weeks, if not months, and it would cost an awful lot of money. Whereas when you're in the cloud, you could use a service like Amazon Guard Duty, and you're literally ticking a box in an interface to turn that on. And the minute that sees something, it's notifying you, it's telling you something's happening. So the level of protection that you've got is significantly greater. So we would, again, another top tip, turn on Guard Duty, turn on Amazon Macy, turn on those services that are available to you if you're running in AWS already, because they will raise your security posture significantly above what you perhaps have today. And you can do proactive things like turn on Guard Duty in all of the regions that you're currently not deployed into. So if, for example, you do have some kind of issue and someone spins up an instance in a region that isn't one that you're deployed into, you'll see that Guard Duty will tell you. So there's lots of front-footed proactive steps to take, and we publish those all the time in blog posts and white papers. And you do that today, whether you're on premise or in the cloud, but it's just making sure that you have someone who's there to continually do that for you and make sure you continually stay secure. So it's about building in security at every step of the way, really.
We'll go to Paul next.
Yeah, Paul, what you have 3 end user enterprises here on the panel and about 100 listening to you. So you tell them what they should be doing that they're not doing currently.
I wouldn't dare to do that. One thing I would just, Orlando, thanks for calling out some of those services, right? Guard Duty, Macy. There's a very long list of security tools that AWS actually provides. I'd actually put a question to the panel, but also to the audience is around multi-cloud and hybrid. I'm sure we'll get onto this discussion. One of the challenges we find actually is whilst those tools are potentially available for one cloud platform, it's not usually the case that they're going to cover multiple cloud platforms. And that's where we find customers find that a third party kind of overlay or conduit type service to channel events, if you like, or alerts from tools like Guard Duty, like Mason, etc., through a third party tool, and then be able to hook in their own processes, their own tools and processes out the back end of that. We find tools like Sophos has a cloud security posture management product. It does much more than that, but the core of it is posture management, and we call that Cloud Optics. And it's a multi-cloud solution, so not just AWS, but other cloud providers as well. So we would certainly advise customers to provide to put in place an overlay in addition to those third-party tools. But I think Orlando, the reason I'm kind of hallelujahing for actually calling those services out is that many customers we speak to aren't actually aware of what's available to them. Again, I told you I'd go back to shared security model, but it's that educational aspect up front to understand not only what tools are available, but what the threats are and what the potential weaknesses are. I mentioned at the very beginning a simple misconfiguration. If you're protected by some physical infrastructure, there's some additional mitigation potentially that might help there. But when you're in public cloud, yes, there are potentially other mitigations in place. Maybe you've got firewalling to help with your networking, etc. But it can be the case that a simple misconfiguration causes issues. So adopt a tool that gives you that full visibility across multiple clouds, multiple environments in a single place, highlights those misconfigurations and those events. A good example provided by Orlando there around resources being spun up in regions that you don't typically use. AWS can do that with Guard Duty. Sophos can do that with Cloud Optics. There are umpteen other services out there that can provide you that visibility. But you need to understand that the problem is there in the first instance before you can adopt those tools.
We'll take the same question with a little bit of a twist to Rohit, Venkat, and Rajesh, whoever wants to go first. The question is, what are the cloud and security service providers not doing that they should do in the context of the same collaboration that we're talking about? Who wants to go first?
Rohit?
Venkat, go for it.
Sorry, Rajesh, you said?
I said Venkat can go first.
Okay. No, essentially, a slight variance is that I feel that each party knows their boundaries and limits. The unfortunate thing is that it always extends beyond the what is there in the service level agreement. So essentially, I think the borderline ends at a particular spot or 30th line, whereas that for Orlando or Paul, it ends at 20th line. So actually the gap is in between the 20th and the 30th line. I hope I am communicating what I want to say. So actually the gray area lies in between. And the challenge is that if we are able to decipher that well and practice it. In our company, what we do is essentially we try to do a monthly, quarterly, half-yearly review of those very strictly and ensure that and pull back and see whatever that is required in a particular arena is being practiced or not. Theory is something different, practice is something different. In especially in banking, we can't leave it to a chance. I'm sure it is same for all the industries, but I'm saying repeatedly that banking has immediate hot money. So that's the reason I've been stressing on banking. So we go and try to practice what is there in the paper. If that is being done, and then we are very clear. Having said that, the second point, which we all wish, but which Orlando and Paul may not like, is that how we can become cloud agnostic and nimble-footed in case of any emergency. In today's context,
especially for a bank.
Especially for a bank. So that's becoming a bit of a challenge, both on the cost front as well as on the operational front. If you are able to be cloud agnostic, then it's always easier for us to see that how we'll get the best out of any partner, and vice versa. Like at the end of the day, it should be a mutually beneficial relationship. Essentially, I am comfortable with the security tools as well as the operational service provided by the CSPs, but the challenges on the nitty-gritties, which people are not willing to go to the last mile at any point of time, including all our organization, the challenges on whether we are practicing what we are preaching. That is the gap.
Yeah, in fact, that is actually the multi-cloud model that even Paul was referring to, right? Where you're having multiple service providers and you're trying to get the best out of everybody. That is definitely, I had a chat with Microsoft also at some point, the Azure people, and they said, it's not that Microsoft is best at everything. AWS is best at, certain things. We are good at certain things. And enterprises can take the best out of, different players depending on their needs, which is a great thing to do. Rohit, your suggestions to Orlando and Paul.
I don't think I'm in any position to suggest anything to Paul and Orlando, but I think there's definitely a lack of information while the information is there when people come on board on any cloud. I think the service receivers like us, many times we're not aware what all we should be turning on. So Orlando, you just mentioned that we can guard GT and other tools. It's just literally a checkbox. People are worried, if I click on this checkbox, how much would it cost me? And that's when they stay away from clicking on that checkbox, exactly like Venkat has said. So I think it's more about if people are aware that if you do these, here is a cost that you will incur, but then here's a benefit that you incur. If that is being somewhere easily communicated, I know Orlando, Paul, it's all there in documentation, and we get buried ourselves into documentation to be able to understand that. But if there's any way we can put this simply out there, and people like novice people like us who are just learning things, it becomes much easier for us to kind of follow through and execute. But that being said, I would always go back to Paul and Orlando and say that overall, Alokesh, they've done an amazing job of helping us out, giving us standards, and which if we follow those standards to the T, there's no reason for us to fall prey into the hands of imposters.
Rajesh, same question. Your suggestions to Paul and Orlando? So,
again, since I wear two lenses, one is protecting my organization and then customers' organization. One of the big things which is coming out is the unknown and the fear of unknown. Okay, I don't know how secure will be when I move to cloud because I've never done it. So what we are doing with our customers, the 1,100 customers I have, is I partnered with a very, very niche startup, an Indian startup called Lucidias. It basically goes under cyber risk quantification, okay, at different levels. And they have had the patents across from Stanford and MIT, sorry. And, that helps to assess as is and to be state. Okay, so a lot of my customers, I'm able to offer that as a service because it's a boardroom discussion. What happens when I'm breached? What happens to my brand? What happens? Look at what happened to the Pune Municipal Corporation, right? Suddenly every corporation is feeling vulnerable because it happened. So it's not only the confidence of the business, but it's also the impact on the brand. So the price, and I'm coming back to the price factor, as long as you're convinced that when you move to cloud, and as I told you about that Finnish example, the Finnish enterprise example, there are 2,000 people protecting my asset versus 20 in my organization. I mean, these companies have invested, the cloud company, the hyperscalers have invested billions of dollars to build up technology which will make me feel more secure. Okay, and I know that within within all the hyperscalers, and I'm working, since I also lead cloud globally for my organization, and I talk to all the hyperscalers, this security on cloud is the fastest growing business unit for all of them. Now, which means that they will continue to invest more and more, which means they will put money to speed fast. And I'm not advocating cloud here, but what I'm advocating is that when you move to cloud, you got to trust that there is equal and more money being spent by the hyperscalers because it's their bread and butter. They cannot afford to let go. You can imagine what happens to their brand if there is a security breach. What happened to America when the solar winds and the FireEye attack happened. It really brought the prestige of a nation down. So the security breaches are more damaging than we just think about, not only to the business, but to brand, to the confidence of the business. And most of the boards are now looking at, can I quantify my risk? And that's where I'm coming at and saying, yes, you quantify your risk real-time basis. And then you quantify when you are going to cloud and you will see the difference. So I think the guidelines is you got to trust. Yes, it may be less or more expensive depending how you tick the box. And I agree that cloud providers have to be more transparent, but the benefits are huge. And we will have to someday bite it. So why not now when COVID has forced us?
Right. In fact, Rajesh, the other thing about hyperscalers is also they also have the best people, right? So, in terms of cybersecurity, they always attract the best cybersecurity professionals, and then they leave you high and dry, I suppose, in certain areas.
Yeah.
But we will give Orlando and Paul a chance to respond to the suggestions that the users in the user enterprises have given. Orlando, you want to say a few words?
Yeah, thank you. So that's it's all really interesting to hear. And I think I when I talk to customers, I'm seeing customers that have gone through a lot of assessment of their own infrastructure, their own processes, and they want to move to the cloud because they know they can deliver more security in the cloud, because the cloud is more secure than is on premise. And all of the things that we've spoken about today happen on premise and happen, wherever you deploy your infrastructure, and a lot of it comes down to human error more than anything else. But the security of the infrastructure is far greater in the cloud, and we have customers at intelligence community level who recognize that as well and use AWS because of that. And there's a couple of very famous quotes from people about the security of the cloud and why wouldn't you deploy the clouds. And when you roll that all the way back to sort of compliance requirements and regulatory requirements, there are some very forward-thinking regulators who require you to deploy things in the cloud because it is just simply more secure than is possible on premise. And I say that from experience of dealing with customers today, but also from a experience of being a penetration tester years ago. It still remains very easy to walk into someone's data center that's in an office building, for example, and remove a rack from a data center. You just don't get to do that in the cloud. It's not possible. So the enterprises thinking about the cloud are doing it because they want to enhance their security, raise their security posture in every possible way.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just respond to a comment I think Rohit made around really needing to know what services to turn on for what use cases and that kind of education factor. And to that, I would say I would encourage organizations to use cybersecurity vendors as a trusted advisor. So, we live and breathe these services. We we know the services that Orlando is speaking of, very, very well. We have our own tools, but we also understand the native tools very well as well. So, leverage your security vendor as a trusted advisor in this space to understand that. I would also say as well, and we haven't really spoken too much yet about resources in your organization and availability of resources and expertise. So organizations don't have to do this alone. There's no shortage of partners out there. Like Sophos is a channel first organization, and we have thousands of partners who are specialists in this area. So if you don't have the resources or the expertise in-house, or even if you do but want to supplement them, then organizations like Sophos can connect you with a partner community that can either extend your existing team or provide that kind of overlay to give you that greater peace of mind as well. So I would just add that as well.
I'll go to Ashish with the same question. We were speaking on collaboration, and to your mind, what is the ideal division of responsibility? We've already taken in the views from the end users, and we've also spoken to service providers.
Yeah. So, Chetna, the division of responsibility. It's obviously not going to be a magic wand to say this is the formula or this is a standard formula. Depending upon, as I said, what services do you avail from hyperscalers, that decides what is the model that you would follow. So depending upon, as I said, if you are taking, let's say just for an argument, if you're talking about taking a certain services for all your campaign management and your Salesforce, not the Salesforce organization, but Salesforce automation set of processes. Now, if that process is put on cloud, your service provider has certain responsibilities. You may, as an organization, because it's already a software on a certain infrastructure, your responsibility then perhaps become more focused on who are the users, how are you logging their activities, what are some of the key data related controls that you need to own up. A lot of infrastructure related controls can possibly be handled by that organization, that service provider. So the line really is drawn depending upon what services or what nature of consumption that you have. I think all of us have talked about there are enough tools. Absolutely, yes. There are enough use cases where you apply cloud to. But what is also important for all of us to understand is that tools don't work on their own. You have to make the tool ring the song, ring the music, dance to what you give them as particular guidelines. The rules are defined by you as an organization. There are enough tools that can come in, and it's essentially those tools that help you to secure better. But there is no tool that works on its own. So you need to have that intelligence of what needs to be built in. You need to have an intelligence within the organization or your service provider to be able to say, what should I build in as my security posture in the organization? And then use those tools to the best of their capabilities.
Right, indeed. Thank you, Ashish. Very, very focused and insightful as always. And Paul did mention about the complexity of cloud. We're getting into multi-cloud environments. We were talking a little bit about that. Basically, the cloud environment itself is getting increasingly complex, and there's now this feeling that you actually need a specialized cloud team within organizations to manage the dashboards and the cloud, the intensity of the cloud networks these days in enterprises. Companies are getting into hybrid clouds. Multi-cloud is becoming an increasingly popular, mechanism these days. A lot of people are yet to, figure out the main difference between hybrid and multi-clouds, but there are differences. And using so many cloud apps plus on-prem apps, then there's huge volumes of data being stored in transit. App access, credentials being compromised and all. So let us talk a little bit about security strategies in this kind of a complex environment. But before we get into the discussion, I'd like to call for a poll of the audience on this. Can we have the poll? Okay, so the question is, Public versus private versus hybrid versus multi-cloud. Which is the least secure?
Public cloud winning hands down so far.
Expectedly. The multi-cloud is coming second. Hmm. I had the impression that public cloud has also become quite secure these days. Isn't that right, Orlando? I think the perception has not changed much.
It is absolutely, as I said, at the beginning, public cloud, it's AWS is secure by default, and I think it was Rajesh or Rajesh who said that it has to be, because otherwise we wouldn't have a business model. My job is to earn trust with customers, and we do that by showing them the levels of security they can achieve. If we couldn't do that and the cloud wasn't secure, you wouldn't use the cloud.
So you have results coming in.
You see the result?
Yeah.
So what should be a problem? What would be, let's say, the pillars or the standout principles of a strong cloud strategy in this kind of an environment? Who wants to go first? We can pick. Rajesh, you wanted to go for it?
Yeah, I think I was quite surprised to look at the results.
Yeah.
In
fact, we ran this poll once earlier, and the results were different. But this time, with this group of people that we have in the audience, the results are starkly different, and public cloud comes up easily on top.
Absolutely, and I think it is down to it's almost like I get a feeling, the initial feeling, if the vaccine was secure enough to protect against COVID, right? And so much of marketing was needed. And I remember when it started, the utilization of these centers was less than 40%. And I think it will be down to people taking that trust and faith and moving the workloads onto cloud and securing it. Uh, when I see across my customers, a lot of people have actually decided. So no more are CXOs thinking of cloud. They have decided they have to move to cloud. The biggest challenge comes on the legacy and the fear of, especially when attacks like SolarWinds and FireEye, which is a large-scale attack, happen. It kind of takes the confidence level low. But, again, coming back to the same question, which that customer of mine told me, tell me how many times Azure has been attacked and it's in the news, or tell me how many times an AWS has been attacked. You have seen enterprises being attacked because there's only so much technology an organization can put behind it. So I'm quite surprised. I think it will be down to people taking that leap of faith and bigger companies being, standing behind it. It's, when Mr. Modi took the Covaxin, that created a huge confidence of people taking that particular vaccine. And same thing when you have bigger organizations doing their major workloads. I mean, today I'm doing a world's two largest, one in insurance and one in telco, world's two largest cloud transformation, which is a 5-year journey. When you are able to take lift and shift, I mean, these are billions of dollars of contract which we are executing, and security cannot be ignored when you're doing, because your heart is in technology and you're moving technology to cloud. And as Orlando said, there is no other option but cloud to be investing and making it more secure, because it's bread and butter for them. And I haven't heard a single, instance. We have heard factories and data centers and ransomware attack, even to a company like Cognizant, who was a technology savvy company, got a ransomware, right? Because they were on-prem and they were providing support. But we haven't seen large-scale attacks happening on cloud. So I think it is building confidence. And I'm sure if you take the poll a year later and a year later, and as Andy said, 4% will someday become 40%, and there will be more people. It's like vaccine, right? We have now 130 million people who have used it. And now there is a confidence. There's queue everywhere. People want to be safe. And I think same thing will happen with cloud. Orlando, that's my feeling. I don't know, what do you think? But security is the biggest workload, which has started moving now onto cloud. And we are seeing it across industries, across geographies, and across customers.
So what are some of the best practices to manage complex cloud environments? Yeah, go ahead.
You want me to go ahead or you want to put it? Because
go ahead.
So Chetna, I think isn't a straight answer, okay? Because as I told you, the maturity of the organization, readiness to move to cloud. So assessment is the first part of it, and we, a lot of the companies like even Deloitte does a lot of good assessment work to see which workload can move easily. And I correlate this to, the origination of the IT industry. Okay, if you see when IT industry originated during the Y2K days, the complexity of outsourcing was very, very low. Now when you look at the outsourcing, because the industry is matured in last 2.5 decades, you see a lot of product development, a lot of core, banking processes and core manufacturing processes are being outsourced because the confidence got built with an outsourcing industry. So I think that confidence will get built with the cloud as well, and that is when people will be moving more and more, and confidence. And so, what will decide is the maturity of the organization. The companies like Deloitte and TechM, which will do assessment and tell them and be successful with those workloads in phases, and then everything eventually will go there. I mean, my view is in 10 years' time, it will be like taking horses to come to work, right? People used to take horses to come to work, and now no one does that. And we will have similar. People will only have data centers on cloud, and this is the future which we'll see. It's a matter of time how the confidence and how companies like AWS and Azure and IBM and Google puts the confidence to the enterprises.
Okay, let's go to Rohit and Venkat, because Deloitte will come to for the last expert view. Since Rajesh has mentioned Deloitte now several times, so we have to, of course, Deloitte is consulting, so this is a consulting question. But before the consultant comes in, let's have the users first answer it.
I think we can break the cloud implementation into three major buckets again. I would say application and infrastructure security is one of them. Second is human mistakes or the processes that we would want to set up. And the third is, how do you actually, segregate your information, account segregations, which means when you're talking about production environment versus you're talking about, non-production environment. So infrastructure security, again, we're talking about how do you make sure your ports are secure, your DDoS, you're secure from a DDoS attacks, you're behind a firewall, you're behind you're accessing your applications through a VPN. All of these are infrastructure security in my head. Then when you talk about application security, we're talking about making sure that your applications fundamental codes are being taken care of. You have multiple static tools that you're running to see, or single static tool running and seeing about whatever applications are secure. If they're not, we fix those. So those are fundamentals in my head that we should take care of. Network security. So all of this is part of fundamentals. Then when you talk about human mistakes, like minimal access is what I was thinking while Rajesh was talking. I was also thinking managing accounts, people falling prey to phishing. How do you ensure those elements which through a proper process being implemented around people, and ensuring that is being taken care of, ensuring that access to data information is minimal and through clear authentication in terms of you're authorized to access this information, you're not authorized to access the information. That is very, very important, which is more to do with the processes. And third is you have no access to production environment, period. You only have access to pre-production testing environment, because a lot of these issues happen just because you have accesses to a lot of things which you should not have access to. I think these are the three broad buckets that I think we should implement cloud security. Again, my way of Novice way of sharing this perspective. I'm pretty sure Paul and Orlando will have a different way of looking at it. But yeah, that's it.
Before we go to Paul and Orlando, we'll go to Venkat and ask him to weigh in on this topic about what are the best practices to manage complex cloud environments, especially for a bank which also has to operate within that circumference of a very strict regulation in India.
Absolutely. I take what Rohit and Rajesh said. And in addition to that, what I am saying in the consumer point of view is on the trained resources. Today, we do have a lot of challenges in having the trained resources. As a point number 2, Rohit was mentioning about the human errors. I am talking about whether we are equipped at this point of time, resources wise, to handle this. In the first poll, we saw that misconfigurations topping the list. So essentially, that is a technical in detail. And why that misconfiguration happened is, one is due to the service level agreements, not knowing where it other parties' responsibility end and where ours start. That is point number 1. Second is a clear knowledge gap that exists with the resources. It could be internal to the organization. It could be external to the organization. It could be at our end. It could be at the CSP's end. So I feel the biggest challenge we face as an organization, especially a small finance bank, why I'm emphasizing on that is on the resources constraints, which we will have both knowledge-wise as well as on the monetary front, which has a organization like us will have a challenge, because we'll not have a very big purse to open up. When Rajesh talked about $1 billion, so on and so forth, it's going to be much more difficult for an organization which is smaller in nature. That is point number 1. Second is obviously on the mistakes front, whether it's going to be, whether the configuration is right, whether the identity and the access managements are in place is the biggest challenge today. Third, phishing, as he was talking about, like essentially, I feel that 75, 80, 90% of the attacks happen due to human errors, not due to technical issue is what I feel, because it's a low-hanging fruit, and people are trying to capitalize on that. With the kind of geopolitical tensions across, there has been a lot of state-sponsored attacks which is happening. And in recent times, we have been advised by our regulator to check on the dark web on so many details of the cards and other areas, which basically emanate from a low-hanging fruit attack rather than a very, very technical attack. So I feel a trained resource could be one of the challenges we have at this point of time in handling any cloud security. And the second and third point I elaborated earlier.
Right. In fact, Ashish, finally, the consulting question comes to the consultant. What is the, please outline some best practices for all of us, including everybody in the audience, so that we know what to do.
Right. Thanks for finally calling me consultant. So good to all sort of close it on that note. But yes, Alokesh, I think if you really go through all that we've talked about, I would say I'll sum it up very broad. Number 1, what we call in our consulting language, or in general security parlance, security by design. You design security rather than looking at it as an afterthought. After you moved your workloads and into cloud, we touched upon lift and shift. It is all essentially making sure that security is plugged in as a basic parameter. Training of employees, third party, not just your employees, third party employees. There have been enough instances where organizations have fallen into a bit of a problem because perhaps a third party employee also needed a little more understanding and knowledge to deal with that. There is absolutely no two way about a constant, Paul talked about security posturing, a constant threat modeling and understanding of what is the evolving security landscape. I will close this with an example of what I heard from someone who is responsible for managing the entire UIDI infrastructure. He said, Ashish, do you believe that we guys don't get cyber threats? And the kind of threats that come in, the kind of attacks that may be coming, the only way that we are securing ourselves, and this is like one of the most important infrastructure of the country, right, is by learning every day, evolving as we go, whatever are the threats, analyzing them and making sure that the next day we are better than the day that we were just completed. So it's an evolving space, will continue to be so. The attackers may be a step ahead, which is not going to necessarily result into, because as I said earlier, it takes 300 days. 299 days, you'll definitely be much more secure.
Right. Thanks, Ashish. While you were talking, there are quite a few interesting questions coming in. I'll take a question to Orlando. It's a question from Anand Datta. He's asking, what is your view on the requirement of third-party security services and how they complement the cloud-native security services by AWS?
Well, I mean, there's, I think as Paul said earlier, you know, Sophos are a partner-driven organization, so are AWS. And one of the most useful ways to be able to adopt the cloud is to take what you're already using, what you already have in your existing infrastructure and use that in the cloud, whether it's bring your own license or whether you spin up an instance of some kind of technology you've already got. Being able to deploy similar technologies, if not the same technologies that you use on premise, but in AWS is fantastically enabling, because you're not changing very much at all. You're just increasing the footprint you have in the cloud. And over time, you're beginning to migrate more and more technologies into the cloud. And using partners and third parties helps you do that. If you actually need the technical assistance as well, and you need sort of consulting partners to help you do that, again, AWS supports a huge partner network that are there to help you with those skills. If you don't have cloud skills, they can train you up, they can bring consultancy into your organization. So it's a huge ecosystem, is the word to use, isn't it? It's there to support you and guide you and make your life a lot easier. So it's not such a big sort of switch to flick. I think a lot of people think about cloud as being a wholesale change in the way things work, and it isn't. It doesn't have to be in the slightest.
Paul, you want to take a shot at that question?
Yeah, well, obviously we're going to say that the third-party tools are necessary, but I think Orlando hit the nail on the head there, really. As you're first moving into the cloud, the easiest thing to do quite often is to take the familiar tools like workload protection, agent-based technologies, firewalls, etc., take them with you as you go. And certainly in the case of Sophos, we've cloud-enabled and cloud-integrated those services so that you can very easily deploy them and manage them from AWS and other cloud providers. So the other thing I would just mention as well is that it's not an either-or question. Should we use the native tools of AWS or should we use a third-party tool? Use the combination of the two. I mean, a great example would be our Cloud Optics product that I've already mentioned. We actually work very closely with AWS to integrate in with those native tools and actually provide that embrace and extend kind of experience, if you like. So AWS is very good, as I mentioned, in terms of providing a number of security tools, but actually you need some level of expertise to stitch them together to create something that you could otherwise buy via a third-party product. And that's something that our product does, is actually out of the box stitches those services together for you and then provides an additional level of security intelligence over and above that as well. So I would say it's not an and or, it's a better together proposition of native tools together with third party.
Thank you very much, Paul. In fact, we have run out of time. We are 5 minutes over time, but I can't help but take another 60 seconds of your time to run one more last poll with the audience that we had created. And just to give us a little bit of insight, we are talking about threats and cybersecurity, but we have not asked the most fundamental question. What is the most dangerous threat vector on the cloud?
There are 4 options: phishing, malware hosted in the cloud, malicious Office documents, and finally, popular cloud apps used as malware delivery channels.
The places I read that there's apps like Google Drive and OneDrive, which are hugely popular in terms of storage by consumers. Mm-hmm. They are also largely used as delivery channels for malware. There's some numbers and percentages that I saw. I don't recall them exactly now. But phishing has always been the most popular method to break into something.
Okay, there goes the final result.
Right. So that gives us a little bit of something to think over when we go back home. I'd really like to thank everybody who came to this panel, and it was really, really wonderful to have all of you. So many deep insights. Ashish, thanks for coming. It was really wonderful listening to you, and all those best practices that you outlined. I hope everybody's going to follow them. Orlando, special thanks to you. The perspective from the cloud service provider was extremely important for this discussion. It was great having you. Paul, thank you so much for the security aspect. And Rajesh, Venkat, Rohit, wonderful having you all here. Lots of interesting points, and we're going to put out the coverage very soon in the Economic Times. We'll keep in touch. We'll make sure that you know when it comes out. Thank you, Suchetna, for being such a great moderator.
Thank you,
See you all
Anish.
soon. Take care. Stay home. Stay safe. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You.
Really enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you, Anish.